people sometimes say, aren't you ashamed of making a living making snide, underhanded remarks about public officials? And my only defense is it's not much of a living.
First start, let's do this.
Do you think, and I'm just going to go around and ask questions about your life and your career.
Okay.
Do you think that the idea of spending weeks, months on a story, as you used to do, is a thing that will continue, or is a thing of the past?
I do think it's difficult to difficult to find a place to put pieces like that now. Magazines are getting thinner and disappearing. I suppose some of them are on the internet. I started in about 1967, and we arranged that I would do a piece every 3 weeks around the country. And I did that until 1982. I did feel that in some ways in those days I had a lot of stories to myself, in the sense that the newspapers and magazines were interested in non-political stories or non-celebrity stories, usually in the middle of the country only when there was an important election or a big scandal or both of those things at the same time. So I often found stories, and I often, when I got to a place, said I was from the New Yorker, had people say, what are you doing here? It seemed like a local story to them. I was interested in telling a story, in the sense of telling a story that you might sit around the campfire and tell a story, and I wasn't interested in the importance of the people. And the New Yorker was a good place to do writing and reporting like that, because the New Yorker didn't require what newspaper people sometimes call the nut graph, which is the paragraph that tells you why the story is important. We used to at time call it the billboard paragraph. So if you did a cover story on a racing driver, you might say, some racing drivers have won more money and some are faster, but no racing driver, blah, blah, blah. That was the sort of billboard paragraph. And the New Yorker was not required to do that. The billboard paragraph in some of my stories would have had to say something like, all over the country, disreputable people in small towns are killing each other, or something like that. I mean, I didn't have one of those. So I was only interested in whether it was an interesting story.
What was your relationship to the New Yorker when you were a kid?
I didn't know much about the New Yorker when I was a kid. I had one cousin who took the New Yorker, and she was considered rather strange.
What were you like as a child?
I was a well-behaved little boy until sixth grade. And in sixth grade, in Sunday school, we were studying the Psalms, and we got to, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand lose its cunning and my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. And I suddenly found myself standing and saying, if we forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand lose its cunning and my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. Everybody laughed and I was kicked out of class. I still behaved myself in general, but I found that there was something else that interested me.
Do you have any thoughts on the disappearance of literacy and public discourse, and in our leaders, when you compare the letters of Lincoln and Roosevelt with today's political figures?
Well, I think what concerns me and concerns a lot of people is that what's happening now with the sort of Twitter insults is that might be sort of accepted as the normal way of communicating in public life, and it goes both ways because partly because of the way the president behaves and what he says, people talk about him in terms that I've never heard anybody talk about the president, I think that concerns me, and I think it should concern everybody.
What is your relationship with social media?
My relationship with social media is non-existent. I don't have Facebook and I don't have Twitter, and I've somehow survived. It just seems another way to waste your time. I have a lot of ways to waste my time. I don't need any more. I definitely backed into journalism. I think most people my era backed into journalism because they didn't want to go to law school, or they were trying to write a novel and couldn't figure out how to do it, or they just happened to be working at a newspaper when it turned out they couldn't decide anything. When I say I backed into journalism, I knew I wasn't going to do anything that required manual dexterity or mathematics skills. I've always said that mathematics was my worst subject. I was never able to persuade the teacher that many of my answers were meant ironically. I was sort of between projects a little while ago, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to recatalog my collection of Civil War artifacts. But I don't have a collection of Civil War artifacts or any other collections. This is the time to put that harpsichord kit together. I don't have a harpsichord kit. I don't have a golf game to polish, so I suppose it's just writing or sitting quietly in a dark room.
In your whole life, has it ever been a case where people have difficulty understanding if you're being serious?
Oh, definitely people have difficulty understanding because I don't laugh at my own jokes. My mother told me not to laugh at your own jokes. So sometimes people think, when I used to do the Tonight Show, when Johnny Carson was there many decades ago, the introduction always mentioned that I was amusing or something like that, so that people would know it was okay to laugh. I took a writing course in college that had those usual mottos like show don't tell and all that sort of thing, and one of them was individualized by specific detail. I thought that was the most useful one. Also, humor is sort of indefensible. If the woman in the second row doesn't laugh, it isn't funny to her, and there's no way to tell her, Madam, I'd like to say that the people in the first show laughed hilariously at that line, and they were certainly as sophisticated as you are. Why aren't you laughing? She didn't think it was funny. So humor is just totally subjective, and that's one reason there's no way to sort of try to imagine your audience when you're writing. I think you could only satisfy yourself.
When rereading your piece, your beautiful piece about Alice, I was really struck by when you said you wrote to impress her.
My wife Alice, who died in 2001, was the person I showed rough drafts to. I think the only person, and then waited for the decision. I was told by a avuncular and really nice older writer at the New Yorker that it was very dangerous to show your pieces to your wife, that it was because what you wanted to hear, and it's true that what all writers want to hear if they show somebody something is brilliant, don't change a word, even if you know it's sort of rough. And obviously she wasn't going to say that. And I said, well, if I thought I could get along without it, I would. But I'm not sure I can. So, yeah, her opinion. The other part of it was, I was trying to impress her. Shall I go ahead?
Sure.
I showed Alice everything I wrote in rough draft, partly because I valued her opinion, but partly because I hoped to impress her. If the piece was meant to be funny, the sound of laughter from the next room was a great reward. When I wrote in the dedication of a book for Alice, I meant it literally. In that sense, the headline of her obituary in the Times was literally true, as well as in the correct order. It described her as educator, author, and muse. When Alice died, I was going over the galleys of a novel about parking in New York. a subject so silly that I think I would have hesitated to submit the book to a publisher if she hadn't, somewhat to her surprise, liked it. When the novel was published, the dedication said, "I wrote this for Alice." Actually, I wrote everything for Alice. My name is Calvin Trillin, and this is my brief but spectacular take on my life in writing.